On May 25, 1941, in the North Atlantic, roughly 500 nautical miles south of Cape Farewell, Greenland, the crew of U-557 faced a shock that would redefine submarine warfare. A young midshipman gripped the periscope handles with a trembling hand, not from fear of visible threats above the surface, but from a sound that resonated through the steel walls of their vessel. A sharp metallic ping vibrated through the compartments, unlike anything they had ever encountered. Decades later, Friseur C. Herbert Werner recorded in his personal journal, "It was a sound we could never have anticipated. It resonated through the hull like a warning bell. The British had discovered us beneath the waves." For years, German submarine crews had operated under the assumption that the ocean's depths rendered them nearly invisible. They had been trained to believe that diving beneath the waves was enough to vanish from detection. Yet that morning, Werner, 22, and his 48 fellow sailors realized the ocean no longer provided sanctuary. Allied technology could now penetrate the water itself. This single sonar ping signaled the start of a sweeping transformation. Over the next 4 years, German submarine crews would endure an escalating psychological strain as Allied detection tools evolved from rudimentary experiments into highly accurate hunting systems. The rules of underwater combat were being rewritten, not through torpedo calculations, but through sound waves capable of revealing previously hidden U-boats. The decline of Germany's submarine dominance had quietly begun. Widely deployed, only 3 German submarines were confirmed sunk by such detection during the conflict. Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, sonar technology advanced gradually. At His Majesty's ship Osprey, the Royal Navy's anti-submarine training facility in Portland, scientists refined the principles of sound-based detection. Their system, later named ASDIC, emitted high-frequency sound pulses that, when reflected off a solid object, returned as echoes. By measuring the time interval between emission and return, operators could calculate distance, while rotating the transmitter provided bearing. The first operational ASDIC sets were deployed on British destroyers in 1928. These early models were crude. Oscillators, quartz discs that converted electrical signals into sound, had to be suspended overboard, and their effective range was only about 3,500 yards under optimal conditions. Depth detection was impossible, and operators had to distinguish between submarine echoes and signals from whales, schools of fish, thermoclines, or shipwakes. Nevertheless, by 1939, the Royal Navy's confidence in ASDIC was nearly absolute. Senior officers assumed the submarine threat was under control. Every destroyer carried the system, and operators were trained extensively, preparing for convoy protection with minimal losses anticipated. War erupted on September 3, 1939, when Britain declared hostilities against Germany. The passenger liner Athenia was torpedoed west of Ireland by U-30, claiming 117 lives. German submarines quickly demonstrated that British defenses were far from impervious. Commanders such as Captain Lieutenant Otto C. Prien and Joachim Schepke led highly effective patrols, sinking numerous ships while sustaining minimal casualties. Hydrophones could only pick up the loud noise of surfaced engines, while silent electric motors rendered a fully submerged boat essentially a ghost. Feldwebel Wolfgang Hirschfeld, a senior radio operator aboard U-109, wrote in his patrol diary, "We assumed the enemy relied on outdated hydrophones from the last war. As long as we ran silently after diving, we were safe." This confidence shattered upon encountering active sonar. The first crews subjected to ASDIC described the sound as rapid, metallic clicks, like dried peas dropped into a tin can, intensifying as the hunter approached. Unlike steady propeller noise detected through passive listening, these pings were unmistakably artificial and directionally precise. Lieutenant Herbert Werner, U-557's watch officer, recalled in Iron Coffins how a British destroyer sonar located them while stalking a convoy south of Greenland. At periscope depth, the ping struck the hull relentlessly. Every crew member realized instantly that their position was fully exposed. Within seconds, the U-boat's role reversed. Predator became prey. Captain Loten Adorpulsion, a veteran commander, ordered a dive to 200 meters. The crew executed with practiced efficiency, but the implications were clear. Their greatest tactical advantage, invisibility, had been removed by technology they barely understood. The Allied sonar operator, likely a young sailor himself, held the ultimate edge: the ability to see through water. Each ping, transmitted at 14 kHz, produced a detailed acoustic image, giving the hunter complete awareness of the hunted. By the spring of 1941, the era of safe, invisible submarine patrols had come to an abrupt and irrevocable end. Ultrasonic waves, far beyond the threshold of human hearing, were used to track U-557. When these signals struck the submarine's steel hull, they bounced back to hydrophones located beneath the destroyer's keel. By measuring the time interval between the pulse and its return, operators calculated the distance to the target, while the direction of the echo indicated its bearing. Every maneuver made by the submarine was monitored with growing accuracy. For 7 hours, the destroyer subjected U-557 to relentless depth charge attacks. The submarine descended to 200 meters, switching to silent running, and moved at a crawl. Crew members could hear the churning of propellers overhead, followed by the heavy splash of incoming explosives. Each detonation transmitted violent shocks through the hull, loosening paint, breaking light bulbs, and causing minor injuries from ruptured eardrums and noses. The structure of the boat groaned under immense pressure. To conserve energy and reduce noise, non-essential systems were powered down, and electric motors pushed the vessel forward at minimal speed. Even the smallest movement inside could reveal the submarine's position. The internal conditions deteriorated as time slowed. Temperatures exceeded 35 degrees Celsius. Condensation formed on bulkheads, and the air became stifling with the combined odors of sweat, fuel, and fear. Carbon dioxide accumulated quickly, making each breath a struggle as the crew recycled the same air through dozens of lungs. The destroyer maintained continuous sonar contact, with periodic intensifications of pinging signaling imminent attacks. Crew members braced for the impact, counting seconds between the water entry and explosion of depth charges. Close detonations lifted the submarine slightly, causing men to stumble, rivets to groan, and leaks to form along weakened seams. Upon surfacing after 9 hours, the crew inhaled fresh Atlantic air, some vomiting from the sudden oxygen intake, others simply absorbing the relief of survival. Although Allied ASD sonar systems could detect submarines, they had critical limitations. Close-range blind zones existed under 200 yards, where the transmitted pulse overlapped with the returning echo, providing submarines brief opportunities for evasive maneuvers. Rough seas, thermal layers, and sound refraction also created areas where sonar was ineffective. Experienced German commanders exploited these conditions, diving beneath thermoclines and mastering silent running techniques to minimize acoustic signatures. German U-boats prioritized detection over evasion. Their passive listening systems, such as the Gruppenhochgerät installed from 1935, allowed the crew to detect individual ships at 20 kilometers and large convoys at 100 kilometers, though bearing accuracy for torpedo attacks remained limited. This approach reflected a strategic emphasis on hunting rather than avoiding detection. Submarine commanders learned to use convoy noise to mask their movements, exploit sonar limitations, and understand the patterns of multiple Allied escorts transmitting on different frequencies to maintain operational effectiveness. Through these tactics, German U-boats remained formidable early in the war, using technological insight, disciplined procedures, and knowledge of Allied sonar weaknesses to continue their campaigns despite persistent anti-submarine measures. Still rudimentary, he noted that detection was only possible when submarines made noise, and that silent running rendered them effectively invisible. This belief was widespread among U-boat commanders, yet it would soon prove disastrously inaccurate. By 1942, the Atlantic theater experienced profound shifts. German U-boats began operating along the U.S. East Coast, taking advantage of America's unpreparedness for submarine warfare. This period, later called the Second Happy Time by U-boat crews, saw merchant vessels traveling alone along illuminated shorelines being sunk in large numbers. Meanwhile, Allied scientists were making rapid advances in anti-submarine technology. In 1940, Britain had shared its ASDIC sonar technology with the United States, recognizing that joint research was the fastest way to develop effective countermeasures. At the Naval Research Laboratory in Washington, American engineers began parallel work on what they named Sonar, sound navigation and ranging, building on British experience. British experts arrived in the US with full blueprints, operational manuals, and even operational ASDIC units taken from Royal Navy destroyers. American engineers analyzed these designs and adapted them for mass production. While the British relied on handcrafted quartz transducers, Americans introduced magneto-strictive transducers using nickel tubes that could be produced at scale. Protective domes were also reimagined. Spherical designs replaced the original streamlined shapes, enhancing acoustic performance. Beyond hardware, British naval officers conveyed critical operational knowledge, teaching U.S. By mid-1942, sonar systems were installed on virtually every new destroyer, destroyer escort, and corvette. Standardized designs allowed for interchangeable parts, seamless crew transitions, and consistent tactical doctrine across the fleet. Industrial production transformed sonar from a specialized British tool into a ubiquitous and highly effective Allied weapon. Several innovations were pivotal. Electrically powered rotating transducers replaced manual cranks, allowing full arc scans in seconds and reducing the time submarines could evade detection. Steel domes replaced canvas covers, maintaining performance at higher speeds and minimizing turbulence noise. Dual-frequency operation combined long-range low-frequency detection with high-frequency precision, allowing operators to locate submarines at distance and then pinpoint their positions. The most significant leap came with the Type 147 ASDIC set in 1943, which added depth measurement to bearing and range, giving escorts precise three-dimensional tracking of submarines. This advancement rendered the underwater environment increasingly perilous for U-boats. German crews began to notice a sharp rise in detection incidents. Oberleutnant Werner, promoted to first watch officer aboard U-230 in late 1942, recorded first-hand observations of this growing threat, marking the beginning of a strategic shift in submarine warfare. In 1941, submarines could evade detection by diving deep and running silently, often losing escort ships within an hour. By 1943, this was no longer enough. Allied ships could maintain sonar contact for 5, 6, even 7 hours. Surface escorts to determine not just distance and bearing, but also depth, German tactics developed against earlier, simpler sonar systems were rendered obsolete. Maneuvers that once guaranteed concealment, diving deep, changing course, running silently, no longer provided safety. The psychological toll on crews was severe. Unlike surface engagements, where sailors could see and engage the enemy, submariners could only endure in the dark as destroyers hunted them relentlessly. The constant ping of sonar striking the hull became a symbol of inevitable danger. Each echo meant the enemy was calculating their exact position, adjusting depth charges to match, and preparing to strike within seconds. Veterans describe the noise as a tortured screech amplified through the steel hull, invading every compartment. Cotton in the ears did little to help. The sound penetrated the structure itself, echoing through decks and air alike. The true terror lay in what the sonar revealed. Submariners understood that sound traveled at roughly 1,500 meters per second. A 2-second return told the exact distance, the direction of the echo gave the bearing, and with the new 3-dimensional ASDIC, the angle of reflection revealed depth. Submarines could no longer hide. U-109's captain, failed Wabel Hirschfeld, who survived multiple attacks in 1942 and early 1943, recorded the relentless anxiety in his diary. Hours of silence and darkness, rising carbon dioxide, men gasping for air, while the pinging above never ceased. Depth charges would fall in patterns, and crews could only wait, counting splashes, hoping the hull would hold. Captains maintained routines and drills, yet all knew that the ocean no longer offered protection. Submarines, once the apex predators of the previous war, had become vulnerable targets. The spring of 1943 marked the turning point in the Atlantic. In March, German submarines sank 120 merchant vessels, almost 700,000 tons, losing only 12 submarines. Most of these attacks occurred against convoys, threatening the critical lifeline between North America and Britain. Although this represented the height of submarine effectiveness, the balance was already shifting. Allied shipyards, especially in the United States, were rapidly producing escorts equipped with advanced sonar. Long-range aircraft with radar and sonobuoys closed the mid-Atlantic air gap. By May 1943, later called Black May, 41 German submarines were lost, about a quarter of operational strength. In just 3 weeks, 96 boats were deployed and 41 destroyed. Compared with 1941, when 35 submarines were lost in a year, the rate of attrition had become catastrophic. The cost-benefit ratio had reversed. Submarines were now being destroyed faster than they could sink merchant ships. Individual losses illustrate the human consequences. U-463, commanded by Kapitänleutnant Leo Wolfpower, was detected while shadowing convoy ONS-5 on May 5. Despite every evasive tactic, deep dives, course changes, speed adjustments, decoy bubbles, the escort ship Vedette maintained contact. Exhausted and damaged, Wolfpower surfaced to fight with the deck gun, but was destroyed within minutes. 46 men perished, 3 survived. German comprehension. By the spring of 1943, German submarines faced an increasingly lethal environment in the Atlantic. One vessel, driven beyond its intended operational depth of 300 meters, creaked under immense water pressure as the hull developed leaks at multiple points. Sonar operators, however, maintained unbroken contact. Surface escorts coordinated methodically. One ship kept continuous ASDIC tracking, while others prepared depth charge attacks. Explosions struck with terrifying precision at the submarine's maximum depth, fracturing the hull and allowing water to surge in. Only a handful of the crew survived the ordeal. The first missions of new U-boats also ended disastrously. On May 6th, U-531 was spotted by a Royal Air Force Liberator equipped with airborne radar while surfaced at night, a scenario previously thought safe. The aircraft's searchlight revealed the submarine from several hundred meters away, and depth charges were dropped before the crew could submerge. Though the submarine remained afloat, surface escorts soon locked on to the radar signature, confirmed sonar contact, and completed the destruction. No crew survived. The list of lost submarines, U-194, U-125, U-438, U-657, U-273, continued to grow. Losses occurred through a combination of aircraft strikes, surface escorts, or joint air-sea operations. Radar and sonar detection had become so dominant that German submarines struggled to operate effectively. For crews still at sea during Black May, the psychological toll was immense. Escorts relentlessly pursued the submarine for 3 days, maintaining continuous sonar contact. Even diving to 300 meters, the maximum rated depth, did not break the tracking. Attempts to surface at night were met by aircraft equipped with searchlights, leaving no refuge. The crew endured prolonged underwater evasive maneuvers while experiencing constant fear of depth charge attacks. Theirs patrol in April 1944 further illustrated the dangers. Departing La Pallice on April 10th, U-415 was tasked with patrolling the western approaches to the English Channel, a mission fraught with risk given Allied air and naval coverage. Submarines could no longer surface safely. Even the snorkel, designed for submerged diesel operation, could be detected by radar. U-415 traversed the Bay of Biscay underwater for 18 continuous hours. When briefly surfaced to recharge batteries in the Atlantic on April 15th, the submarine was almost immediately spotted by an RAF Liberator, which had detected radar emissions before the crew could see the plane. Depth charges damaged the stern torpedo tube, but the submarine remained functional. For the next 60 hours, U-415 moved cautiously on electric power, attempting to evade coordinated Allied hunter-killer groups. Contact resumed on April 18th. ASDIC pings penetrated the hull as an escort maintained continuous tracking. Werner employed every evasive technique, including altering course and speed and deploying decoys, yet the sonar never faltered. Depth charges fell with frightening accuracy, reaching precisely the submarine's depth. As Huff-Duff, capable of triangulating U-boat transmissions, sonar buoys from aircraft extended underwater detection across vast areas. Forward-firing weapons, such as Hedgehog and Squid, allowed attacks without losing sonar contact. This integration created an anti-submarine network far more effective than any single system alone. A typical convoy now enjoyed overlapping protection, 6 to 8 escorts, each armed with sonar, radar, and Huff-Duff, combined with aircraft from Britain, Iceland, or escort carriers. Even the mid-Atlantic gap, once beyond air patrol reach, was covered by very long-range Liberators flying from Newfoundland and Northern Ireland. Submarines faced limited options: maintain distance and remain unable to strike, approach on the surface and risk destruction from aircraft, or close submerged and risk attack by escorts. Hedgehog, in particular, transformed anti-submarine warfare. Unlike conventional depth charges, which detonated regardless of impact, Hedgehog fired 24 small explosives forward in a pattern that maintained sonar contact. If a bomb hit the hull, nearby explosives detonated, often breaching pressure hulls. Crews quickly learned to fear these precise, instant feedback attacks. By late 1943, the balance of power had decisively shifted. The once dominant U-boat had become a vulnerable target in a well-monitored and coordinated ocean battlefield. Silence during an attack often meant the submarine had survived, whereas explosions almost always signaled a direct hit, usually fatal. The psychological strain on crews was immense. Traditional depth charges, while intimidating, could sometimes be survived even when detonating close by. Using data from the ASDIC sonar system, an onboard computer predicted the submarine's movement and adjusted the charges accordingly. Squid-equipped frigates achieved kill rates of roughly 25% per attack, vastly superior to the under 5% success rate of conventional depth charges. German countermeasures proved largely ineffective. The Pillenwerfer, a chemical decoy generating bubbles to confuse sonar, only worked on inexperienced operators. Skilled crews could quickly differentiate between the chaotic bubble echoes and the solid return of a submarine hull. Another decoy, officially called Bold, was more sophisticated. A 1-meter balloon covered in aluminum strips and filled with calcium hydride, it slowly rose through the water, producing hydrogen gas at shallower depths to mimic a submarine's sonar return. In practice, however, Bold could only be deployed from stationary submarines, moved too slowly to protect against evasive maneuvers, and lacked horizontal movement. Experienced ASDIC operators could identify it within minutes. Efforts to reduce sonar detection through absorbent hull coatings also failed. Known as alberic, this concept involved a rubber layer infused with air bubbles to absorb sound rather than reflect it. Laboratory tests showed promise, but real-world deployment was impractical. The coating needed to be several centimeters thick, adding substantial weight. It degraded quickly in seawater, and pressure changes during dives caused it to lose effectiveness, crack, or tear. After extensive trials on captured U-boats, both Allied and German engineers concluded the approach was unworkable. Crews rose sharply. In September 1942, roughly 3,000 men were serving aboard operational U-boats. By August 1944, 28,000 of the 40,000 men who had served were dead, and survival rates dropped below 30%. Each patrol became a near-guaranteed death sentence. As experienced crews were replaced by inexperienced recruits, psychological strain intensified. Feldwebel Hirschfeld, serving on the Type 9D U-234 in early 1944, described sailors as terrified even before leaving port, some breaking down in tears at the first sonar pings, while others froze, unable to act. Veterans struggled to maintain discipline, but the reality was stark. Every boat was essentially an iron coffin. The introduction of snorkels in mid-1944 offered limited relief. These extendable tubes allowed diesel engines to operate while the submarine remained submerged, theoretically enabling patrols without surfacing. Yet Allied radar adapted rapidly, detecting the snorkel heads, and submerged U-boats remained vulnerable to increasingly refined sonar. The snorkel, originally Dutch technology captured in 1940, was improved by German engineers with automatic valves to prevent flooding and underwater exhaust systems to reduce smoke visibility. Operationally, it was grueling. Precise depth control was required to avoid valve closures or exposure. Rough seas made navigation nearly impossible. Diesel engines created deafening noise, and crews suffered exhaustion, nausea, and pain from pressure fluctuations. Allied forces, meanwhile, perfected detection techniques. ASDIC teams were ranked monthly, and top performers received recognition and promotion. This combination of improved technology and expert operators created a network of detection and attack that German submarines could rarely evade, making survival increasingly improbable. By the Mid-Atlantic campaign, Allied sonar operators had achieved near-mythical proficiency. They could distinguish different submarine classes from minute differences in their sonar echoes, follow evasive maneuvers through thermoclines, and maintain contact with near-perfect accuracy. By the time D-Day arrived on June 6, 1944, the Battle of the Atlantic had been effectively won. On the day of the Normandy landings, not a single major Allied vessel was lost to German submarines, despite their determined attempts to intercept the invasion convoys. Allied sonar coverage was so comprehensive that any U-boat approaching the beaches was detected almost instantly and either destroyed or forced to retreat before launching torpedoes. Although some submarines managed to sink small ships in the weeks following the landings, the main invasion force crossed the English Channel largely unharmed. Admiral Karl Dönitz had ordered all available U-boats to engage the invasion fleet, sending 36 vessels into a highly dangerous zone. Shallow waters limited their maneuverability, Allied air patrols were continuous, and surface escorts formed overlapping sonar networks that left virtually no gaps. Even the snorkel-equipped submarines could only make limited progress. U-84, commanded by Odoit Hinder, came close enough on June 8 to target landing craft, but withdrew heavily damaged from relentless sonar tracking and depth charge attacks. Only 3 U-boats survived attacks while managing to strike the Allied ships. Most met catastrophic fates. Running and evasive maneuvers, sonar maintained a precise 3-dimensional lock. When Halstead exhausted its depth charges, the destroyer Eskimo continued the attack with squid mortars, breaching the pressure hull and sinking the submarine with all 48 crew aboard. U-821 was pursued on June 10 for 14 hours by multiple escorts. Its captain, Lieutenant Ulrich Nachfuss, exhausted options, eventually surfacing to surrender, with 37 of 49 men rescued. Across June and July, the attrition was severe. Of the 36 U-boats sent against the invasion, 25 were lost, nearly 70%, leaving only a few battered survivors to return to French ports. No major troop or warships were sunk, and German submariners suffered disproportionate losses. The seabed off Normandy soon became littered with wrecks, which post-war surveys identified as 17 U-boat hulls, most showing clear damage from depth charges. These wrecks stand as reminders of the futility of attacking a force with complete control of sonar and radar. In the final months of the war, Germany introduced the Type 21st submarine, a radical redesign intended to restore underwater superiority. Unlike previous U-boats, which were essentially surface vessels with submerging ability, the Type 21 was built for prolonged underwater operation. Its hull was streamlined for hydrodynamic efficiency, eliminating deck guns and external fittings, while battery capacity tripled to allow sustained submerged speeds of 17 knots. The new boats could remain submerged at 6 knots for up to 3 days and dive to 280 meters, far beyond the reach of standard Allied depth charges. Hull sections often failed to fit correctly, welds cracked under pressure, electrical systems malfunctioned, and rubber coatings sometimes worsened sonar visibility. Only 118 Type 21 boats were completed before the war ended, with 4 reaching combat readiness. U-2511, under Korvettenkapitän Adalbert Schnee, undertook a single operational patrol, demonstrating high underwater speed and endurance, but still susceptible to sonar detection. U-3008, tasked with evacuation from Norway, surrendered without combat, further illustrating the limitations of the design. Post-war analyses confirmed that while the Type 21 represented a significant technical leap, it was not the invincible weapon German propaganda had promised. For surviving German submariners, the lasting memory was the unrelenting ping of Allied sonar. This metallic ringing signaled the end of their dominance beneath the waves and the shift from hunter to hunted. Herbert, one of only 3 U-boat commanders to survive combat operations intact, later moved to the United States in 1952. He worked in Connecticut on underwater acoustics and sonar, reflecting a personal journey from wartime defeat to a civilian career in the field that had once destroyed him. In his 1969 memoir, Iron Coffins, he honored fallen comrades, emphasizing that technology, rather than lack of courage or numbers, had been decisive in the Allies' victory. Werner found a bitter irony in his post-war work. He was contributing to the very sonar technologies that had tracked and defeated Germany's submarines during the war. In 1957, he naturalized as an American citizen, pledging allegiance to the country whose anti-submarine systems had once hunted him across the Atlantic. When his book appeared at the age of 49, it immediately attracted attention. American audiences were intrigued by an enemy's first-hand perspective on submarine warfare, while German readers, particularly veterans, valued its candid depiction of life aboard U-boats. Unlike much of Germany's post-war military literature, which often glorified or rationalized service under the Nazi regime, Werner acknowledged the hopelessness and suffering of the final years of the U-boat campaign. Reception was mixed. Some German ex-sailors argued that he overstated Allied technological advantages, while a handful of American reviewers questioned whether he downplayed German war crimes or exaggerated personal achievements. Scholars debated details and contested numbers, yet the central narrative that German submariners faced sonar technology they could not evade was largely accepted as accurate. Werner continued his career as a maritime consultant until retiring in 1985. He occasionally lectured at the Naval War College and the Submarine School, offering insights to American officers. He also participated in historical conferences and documentaries on the Battle of the Atlantic. Later in life, he advocated for reconciliation between Germans and Americans, speaking at schools and veteran groups about the futility of war and the need for cooperation among nations. The statistics paint a grim picture. Of roughly 1,160 U-boats built during the war, 785 were lost, claiming the lives of approximately 30,000 submariners, a 75% fatality rate, the highest among any service branch. His final diary entry reflected on the brutal reality. Submariners believed themselves hidden beneath the waves, but advanced sonar stripped away that illusion. Survival was rare, and even experienced crews became trapped in steel vessels with no true sanctuary. U-234 had departed in April 1945 with the mission of transporting advanced weapons, technical documents, uranium oxide, and 2 Japanese naval officers to exchange German technology for vital raw materials. Germany's surrender forced Captain Jan Henrik Feller to make a critical decision: attempt the voyage to Japan, scuttle the vessel, or surrender. He chose to surrender to the US, destroying sensitive materials beforehand. On May 19th, the submarine surfaced near New Hampshire and communicated its surrender. The crew was escorted to Portsmouth Naval Shipyard and treated humanely, a stark contrast to the harsh conditions in Soviet captivity. Hirschfeld spent 8 months in Maryland, contributing as an electrician, radio technician, and language instructor before returning to a war-torn Hamburg in January 1946. Hirschfeld found his family's home destroyed and began rebuilding his life through a variety of jobs, including ship repair and translation work for British occupation forces. In the 1950s, he started drafting his memoir from the wartime diary he had kept, which was published in 1972. The book offered German readers an unvarnished view of submarine life from the perspective of a crewman, emphasizing the transition from confidence to terror as Allied sonar capabilities matured. Conceal vessels as they had in the early war years, prompting navies worldwide to study the Atlantic campaigns closely. Post-war submarine design prioritized stealth, acoustic isolation, and sonar evasion. Innovations included echo-absorbing coatings, propeller noise reduction, machinery isolation, and streamlined hulls, all aimed at regaining the invisibility German U-boats had lost. Captured Type 21 submarines and German engineers heavily influenced both Soviet and Western post-war submarine programs. The Soviets incorporated quieting features into their Whiskey-class vessels, while the US tested U-2513 and U-3008 to inform the Tang-class design, adopting teardrop hulls and enhanced underwater speed. Britain also rigorously evaluated U-2511 against modern anti-submarine systems. The enduring struggle between stealth and detection, established during the Battle of the Atlantic, continues to define submarine warfare today. The findings were striking. Even with advances in sonar technology, locating and sustaining contact with fast, quiet submarines capable of deep dives remained extraordinarily challenging. Exercises revealed that if Type 21 submarines had been widely deployed in 1943, they could have inflicted severe losses on Allied anti-submarine forces. This awareness shaped British submarine development over the following decade, culminating in the Porpoise-class vessels, which adopted numerous Type 21 innovations. On the detection front, sonar technology advanced dramatically. The SQS-4 system, deployed in 1952, could track targets over 10,000 yards. Variable depth sonar, towed beneath surface vessels, penetrated thermal layers to detect deeply submerged submarines. Networks of sonobuoys deployed from aircraft created acoustic barriers across critical maritime choke points. By the 1960s, U.S. anti-submarine forces possessed detection capabilities far beyond those of World War II. Soviet submariners faced a reality reminiscent of German crews in 1943, contending with sonar that shattered the underwater refuge they had once relied upon. Declassified Soviet records reveal that submarine commanders during the 1960s and 1970s described Western sonar. Psychological impact in terms strikingly similar to those used by German veterans. The constant awareness that one's location was known, the relentless acoustic pings, and the helplessness of being tracked invisibly created profound stress. Both sides responded with technological innovations, Soviet submarines became quieter through advanced propeller designs, rubberized hull coatings, and new propulsion methods, while American submarines developed increasingly sensitive passive arrays. The competition peaked with nuclear-powered vessels capable of months-long submerged operations, though even these remained vulnerable to acoustic protection. The enduring lesson of the Battle of the Atlantic was clear. Sonar could erase submarine invisibility, and human crews understood its implications. Across navies, the sound of active sonar striking a hull evoked the same instinctive fear that German submariners experienced decades earlier. Detection meant exposure, potential destruction, and psychological strain. Beneath the waves, survival had depended largely on luck, and the veterans recognized the truth their fallen comrades had learned too late. The technological transformation of submarine warfare demonstrated the decisive role of innovation. In 1939, German submarines could operate almost undetected, vulnerable only to chance or error. By 1944, sophisticated Allied sonar could continuously track submarines in 3 dimensions and direct lethal weapons with precision. The underwater sanctuary that German crews once relied upon had vanished, replaced by an unrelenting technological advantage. This shift had strategic consequences. By mid-1943, Britain's supply lines, threatened by U-boat campaigns, stabilized as sonar and Allied tactics reduced German submarine effectiveness. The buildup of American forces for D-Day continued largely unimpeded. Winston Churchill later emphasized the Atlantic convoys as a central concern, now secured through a combination of technological and operational superiority. The experience of German submariners illustrates how rapidly innovation can redefine military balance. Submarines that once struck and disappeared emerged as vulnerable targets, tracked relentlessly by superior technology. 30,000 U-boat sailors perished, victims of advancements they could not overcome. The metallic ping of sonar pulses became the symbol of this transformation, signaling that no ocean depth could guarantee invisibility.